How many tomatoes can you get from one tomato plant? That's the question we're gonna dive into with my tomato arch in today's video. Welcome to the Gardenary channel. Garden plus ordinary equals gardenary. We're trying to make gardening ordinary again. So you with us? Make sure you subscribe to the Gardenary channel, hit that bell so you get a ding every time we drop a new video like this one. Today we're going to talk all about tomato plants and how you can get more tomatoes from your plants and how many tomatoes you can expect to get from your plants in the first place. Let's do it. Now I am going to be harvesting from my tomato arch today, so I've got 4 plants on this arch. If you have not seen my series all about setting up the arch, you can check it out all over the Gardenary channel. I walk you through which plants I put in here and how to set it up. So I have sun gold tomatoes. Those are probably the most prolific. I've got some grape tomato plants. They're in, I think they're Juliets. I think I have one plant that's not actually a Juliet. They were out, but it's similar. So I've got 4 cherry tomato plants, all planted on this one arch trellis. And I've been harvesting from this trellis now for probably almost a month. And we'll continue to get to harvest from these for at least, I would say, another month with good heavy harvests, and then I'll probably slow down the beginning of September. So these plants went in the ground at the end of May. They were started indoors and grown in like a greenhouse for more than a month indoors. So lots of time to get to tomatoes. This is what we call a long and lengthy plant, meaning they take a lot of space and a lot of time, but the results are super sweet. Now, if you search the internet and you ask the internet to tell you how many tomatoes you can expect to get from one tomato plant, you're gonna get a wide variety of opinions. So most times when you Google that, you are gonna find numbers for large tomatoes rather than the cherry and grape varieties. So one of the reasons why I love growing grape and cherry varieties is because I get more. Now they're smaller, but I get to harvest them more often. I can come in here for snacks. And if you've been following my story and my channel much, you know that I'd prefer to be in the garden than in the kitchen. So I'm not one to be putting up tons of like tomato sauces or, you know, salsas and jarring and canning and that kind of thing. That's not really my thing. It may be yours. But for that reason, I love snacking type foods from the garden. So one article I read said that you could get over 200 tomatoes from one tomato plant. Now, when they tell you that, they often have a method to get more tomatoes. And that article was definitely about cherry tomatoes rather than about the larger tomatoes. Another article I read said you could get 10 to 20 tomatoes per plant. So we're talking about a 10 times difference between these two articles. So I'd say from a large tomato plant, that has been my experience, depending on the growth and the way the tomatoes form on the plant, you could get up to say 20, maybe even 30 large tomatoes off of a really strong, healthy, indeterminate tomato plant when growing the larger varieties. And then I will say for smaller plants like these, smaller varieties, you could definitely get several hundred cherry tomatoes off of one vine in a given season. So, what's the difference and how can you get more tomatoes from the plants that you're growing? Well, the first thing you want to do obviously is have a really healthy setup for your plants. So growing them in raised beds is going to make a huge difference because you're going to get to have them be in the healthiest situation possible, and they're going to have room for their roots to grow down. So a general thing to understand about your plants is however much growth you see above the ground, that kind of growth is happening below the ground as well. So when you have a plant that needs a ton of space up top above the dirt, then that means it needs a lot of space below the dirt too. And that's why we use raised beds for sure with tomato plants, because they have such large root systems and they love to spread out and grow underneath well. So that's the first tip to get more tomatoes from your plant, is to grow them in raised beds with great soil. The second thing that I recommend doing for your tomato plants is is feeding them. So tomatoes are known, most nightshade plants are known as heavy feeders, which means the plants take up a lot of nutrients often. So I like to say, I learned from a gardener, they said every time your plant is doing something, you should feed it, doing something new. So doing something new would be starting to flower or starting to fruit or growing new vines. So each time I see my tomato plant, quote, doing something new, then it's time for me to come in and give it a little bit of extra food. So you can do that based on what's growing with your plant at that moment. So if it's fruiting or flowering, you want to be giving it a phosphorus-rich fertilizer to make these fruit form even better and faster. All right, I'm going to switch to this other side of the trellis, and I'll tell you one more thing you got to do to get more tomatoes off of your plants. All right, the third thing to do to get more tomatoes from your plants is to prune. So pruning, I like to say, is a way of talking to your plants. It's a way to tell your plants, I want less of this and more of that, please. So when you prune your plants, prune your tomatoes, especially when you're pruning non-fruiting branches, you tell your plants, hey, I don't want any more non-fruiting branches. I want fruit. And oftentimes your plants will really listen. So if you haven't checked out my video about whether or not I prune the suckers, especially on cherry tomato plants, you can check that out here on my YouTube channel and learn how I prune for massive fruit growth. So pruning is super important. I try to prune once a week during the growing period of my tomato plants. So right now we're in August, so these plants have been growing for 2 months. So I would say they've gotten at least 7 prunes probably. So I'll come in on the weekend and I'll feed the plants. So, you know, just like we talked about, giving them what they need when they need it, when they're doing something new. So I'll put maybe some new compost or some new fertilizer at the base of the plant, water it in really well, and prune away some of the non-fruiting branches. So that way I'm telling my plant, hey, I want more fruit and less leaves. And that is essential for getting more fruit out of your plant. I like to say that plants that are growing in optimal conditions love to thrive. They literally will take over a space if they have optimal conditions to grow in. So if your tomatoes are growing in an optimal condition, that's the way you're going to get the most fruit from them. But that doesn't mean it'll actually be growth that you want. So I have had years, I tell this story in my book, Kitchen Garden Revival. I've had years where I had tons of growth. The tomato plants were huge, but there was no fruit on them, or there were like 5 pieces of fruit on them. I had tons of leaves and very little fruit. And that was because I wasn't pruning them. So I'll say the year that I learned to prune my tomatoes was the year that I started getting way more fruit per plant. So I am still harvesting over here. I just harvested tomatoes, oh, I think it's getting my hair in there. I just harvested tomatoes like this much, I don't know, about 5 days ago. So let's do the math together to close up this video, shall we? I've gotten, I don't know, what do you think this is? 60 or so tomatoes from these vines in this short period. And I am probably picking this many off of 4 plants every 5 days. So if I'm getting, let's say I just get to do that for a month, all right? So for every 5 days, it'd be 6 harvests of about 60 tomatoes each. So that's about 400 tomatoes. So I think I'm being kind of conservative there. So 400 tomatoes off of 4 plants. So that would be 100 tomatoes per plant. What do you think? Do you believe that kind of math? So it comes up somewhere in between those 2 extreme numbers, right? 10 per plant and 200 per plant. I would say a safe bet if you grow tomatoes the way I do is that you're going to get at least 100 tomatoes off of your plants within 4 to 5 weeks when you're in the middle of your harvest. And believe me, it tastes really good. That wasn't a great ending, but I was just so overwhelmed by the taste. I couldn't think of anything better to say. Anyway, I'm so proud of my little tomato harvest, and I know you're going to be proud of yours too. So keep these 3 things in mind: growing tomatoes in a raised bed, feeding your tomatoes often, at least weekly, and pruning them often as well. That's the way you're gonna get massive, maybe not massive, but very impressive results from your tomato plants, and you'll be picking tomatoes for weeks on end and eating right there in the garden. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to take the green thumb quiz. I should have started this before I started eating my tomato. The green thumb quiz is a great way to figure out where you are in the kitchen garden in your journey. We will help you, give you results, and give you some great free resources to help you grow to the next level. Check it out at gardenary.com/quiz. It's right here below this video, or you can find it at Gardenary. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.